some of you maybe heard us chatting at the beginning of this. I always like to tap the La Follette public policy alums because they're doing so many wonderful things. And Lindsay is an absolute poster child for it. I've known her since La Follette. And by the way, Lindsay, we sent your bio out already to everybody. Okay. So I'm just skipping around stuff, but worked with Lindsay after La Follette at Ripon College, where she ended up being finally, I think the highest was assistant dean. But we worked together on the Wisconsin Leadership Institute. She was on the board. That was something that was founded out of the SAVE Commission, a Blue Ribbon Commission that we worked on. La Follette did for Governor Thompson. And then she went from there to Marquette and a bunch of other places. Again, it's in your in the bio. But basically 20 years of experience in all kinds of executive leadership and with nonprofits and others. So I think this big step after you moved from Marquette is a big step. You can explain what that is. And then I think people will be really interested also as well in what you do as a member of the board for the tech schools, to your schools. So take it away and tell us what you do. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Terry. Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the invitation and looking forward to a robust discussion today. As Terry mentioned, I think I'll kind of go over, where we're at today, where I'm at, and a little bit about WRTP Big Step and the role that the organization that I lead plays, and what we're kind of seeing in terms of Wisconsin workforce on the ground. So I am by no means an economist, but I do sit in a unique position as a statewide workforce intermediary, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and through different roles and hats that I wear, kind of what we're seeing, and hopefully giving you an in-depth look at what might be coming down the line in terms of workforce. So I'm going to see if I can change slides here. So a little bit of our roadmap. I'm going to kind of level set the who and what we are at WRTP Big Step and kind of where we're at. Discuss the why. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And why are we doing it the way we're doing? And then where we go from here. So kind of what we're seeing, and again, by no means are we forecasting, economics or economic development, but, we see on the ground what's happening, and that will eventually bubble up into what we see at the state policy level. So a little bit more about kind of who we are. So you read my bio. I am a very proud La Follette alum. I did the MPA program, and from there worked in state government for a bit, and then became a United Way fellow. Part of that was traveling across the country with different United Ways, talking about community impact and how to measure a social return on investment. Ended up working with some community organizations as an executive director, and made the move to Ripon College. I said I would. Ripon College was looking for someone to teach social impact, social entrepreneurship, business, nonprofit management, and I said I will stay for 3 years and then I'll get back to direct service. I ended up staying for for over 12 years, and then decided it was time to get back into direct service. So yes, was a dean there. And then moved to Marquette University to get kind of another perspective on liberal arts and the intersection with industry and what did that mean. And now I am the CEO at WRTP Big Step, which is the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership, building industry group skilled trades employment program. So I always say my board should pay me by the word because it's a very long title. But in essence, this organization was started over 40 years ago by the first Black apprentice in the Milwaukee area, Vince Turan, and 40 years ago seeing the need for a diversified construction industry. Since then, over the years, we've moved into different sectors, specifically focusing on diversifying a skilled, safe talent pipeline for construction, manufacturing, clean energy, broadband expansion, and transportation and logistics. As a statewide workforce intermediary, we do that with a lot of levers and a lot of tools. So in this role, I also sit on the the Fed Advisory Board, the region out of Chicago. We actually have our next meeting this Thursday and Friday down in Chicago. And particularly my role there is to inform the Fed about kind of when they're making some decisions and some changes, how that affects people, how that affects programs, and how that affects benefits and things that are happening in communities. I also sit on the Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards Advisory Council for the state of Wisconsin. So we review pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs. We provide advisement on how those programs should run, essentially. So what are some of the qualifications to be an apprentice, and of course, promote apprenticeship. And I also sit on the governor's workforce council. The Council on Investment and Workforce. The governor appointed me to that to, again, bring kind of this perspective of what the workforce is currently and where we want it to go in Wisconsin. And then I'm also the governor's appointee to the Wisconsin Technical College System Board, which I'll talk more about kind of the role there and what I bring to that table along with many, many others. So I've put up here just briefly kind of what we do as an intermediary. So kind of where the perspective is for this discussion today. You know, we're looking to ensure that all Wisconsinites have access and a pathway to a family supporting career. And there are many ways in which we see that work happening. We really want to enhance the ability of our private and public sectors to recruit, develop, and retain diverse talent. And in emerging sectors of our regional economy, our vision is that everyone has an equitable career pathway. And that can happen through a variety of ways. So the kind of to level set where we're at right now. So Wisconsin and the U.S. unemployment rates, as you can see, Wisconsin today is sitting at about 2.9% unemployment. So historic lows. You can see the spike of COVID, and I'm sure you've all seen some numbers, some graph. This is pulled from the Department of Workforce Development directly. And when we see that in workforce development as a workforce intermediary, and again, at whether we're in the technical college space, whether we're in a workforce development council space, workforce board space, we see that and we think it's a tight labor market, right? And the narrative around that, surrounding that recently, as I'm sure you've read in the paper and online, has been everyone's in the workforce. People who just don't want to work. That's kind of been the narrative. And what we're seeing on the ground is that's a very blanket statement, and it's not always 100% true. And I can kind of go through with you what we're seeing and why that matters. So at 2.9%, our labor participation rate is good in Wisconsin. So we have the most women working across the nation who are participating in the labor force. But we still have pockets of unemployment in Wisconsin. Particularly, there are some rural areas and some urban areas that are hovering at about 13 to 17% unemployment. And that's when you really drill down into the zip code data. And I'm sure when we talk about urban areas and zip codes, the one I'm sitting in right now, 53208, which is in downtown Milwaukee, our unemployment rate is about 14%, and it is almost exclusively those who identify as people of color. And so while the narrative of, well, nobody wants to work, what we're really seeing is access to the workforce is difficult. The DWD secretary, Amy Pachek, and I have discussed this. And, right now there's 2 job openings for every 1 Wisconsinite here. But to get to those jobs can be difficult for a lot of reasons, which we'll go over. So it's kind of the perfect storm of what we're seeing through COVID and then post-COVID. So the first, the Fed is raising interest rates to combat inflation. So going from essentially 0 to 5%, and as of March 1st of 2023, the range is 4.7 to 5%. And experts expect that inflation pressures will ease as the supply chains readjust, but that's waiting, right? That's a lot of waiting. And we know that when the Fed raises interest rates, it doesn't affect everyone equally or proportionally. There's disproportionate effects of that. And the tighter fiscal policy will have an influence over the coming years that we have yet to be seen, right? So trying to guess where we'll land on that. And is it a soft landing? Is it a hard landing, right? And the reason in workforce development we look at this is because if unemployment goes up, again, that's disproportionately usually affecting communities of color, women, people who have are underemployed, and can lead even to occupational segregation. So the outcropping of some of this then is that we just don't have enough workers, right? We hear businesses, manufacturers, construction companies, we hear hospitality say, we just don't have enough workers. There's not enough bodies. And so they're linked in a lot of ways, but the narrative gets a little muddled and a little conflated. We also talk about supply chain and production issues. For example, in some of the solar fields being built here in Wisconsin, we had waiting for some of the technology. We had people employed, but we're being laid off continuously because we're waiting for some of the technology to arrive. So there has been supply chain and production issues as well. Demographic changes, of course. So we're seeing a diversification of our demographics here in Wisconsin, particularly at WRTP Big Step. We serve about 70% of our participants are identified as people of color, and we're seeing even every year 2 to 3 percentage point increase in those who identify as multiracial. And so we're seeing some demographic changes. We're also we work intricately with the unions, so we're seeing a lot of retirements, forecasted that about 35 to 45% of our union membership will retire within the next 5 years. And so what does that do for demographics? We also have almost net zero in-migration to Wisconsin. And of course, historically low birth rates. 2026 will be the year that there'll be the least amount of high school graduates in Wisconsin since the baby boom. And so we're dealing with all of these pressures. This also relates to workplace policies. So, and this is where we get some of that narrative about, well, people just don't want to work, or Gen Zers don't want to work, or it's a different work ethic. And while that may be true, I'm not a sociologist either, not an economist, not a sociologist, but what we're hearing from employers is, well, I can't find people. But there are increased barriers for those who are chronically underemployed or unemployed, but also for youth who did not complete the last 2 years of high school in person and now have additional barriers perhaps that they're facing. And when our workforce policy is operating on pre-COVID assumptions versus post-COVID assumptions, and with rising inflation and supply chain issues, right? So workplace policy hasn't kept up necessarily with how workers work, how workers want to work, and what those workers are facing in terms of barriers. We also have a different workforce landscape when we talk about what does the role of AI and automation play in some of our sectors. The landscape has changed in terms of where are there pockets of development. We're seeing decreasing levels of participation in manufacturers in Wisconsin, which was a traditional base for us here. We've seen that with a lot of closures recently and some more notices from manufacturers. And we're also seeing how transportation and migration of folks have changed the workforce landscape. And then, of course, some generational and socioeconomic changes in terms of who's participating in the workforce, who's anticipated to COVID really accelerated some retirements as well. And it also slowed down some of the recruitment. Of course, birth rates are low. So we're seeing, and then at the same time, we're seeing huge generational investment by the federal government in workforce specifically, which we'll talk more about. So this is kind of the perfect storm in which people like me operate and try and solve. And so it's no longer, I think, about we'll have training programs, and training programs will upskill either new or incumbent workers. And once they have the skills, they will then move into the workplace. And then we'll have the technical college system who will work with employers who will then upskill from there, and people will progress, and that'll be that. And that is just not the linear movement we're seeing. And we don't anticipate that linear movement to ever happen perhaps again. And so how do we anticipate the challenges? How do we work through them? And how do we make sure that narrative isn't always focused on the worker as the problem to the system isn't working for what we need it to do right now?
Wow.
So there are some macro solutions that we've been talking about. And again, I'm not necessarily advocating for any one of these, but there's solutions that if we're in this workforce world, this is what we're talking about. So hopefully giving you pulling back the curtain a bit on what we're talking about. So one of them is some production adjustments. So this could be, there's a lot, the CHIPS Act, right? Can we make microchips here in the US? What does that mean? Are there other productions that can be offshored or are being offshored? Again, this is not my realm per se. However, in terms of workforce, we need to be aware of, for example, if we're going to be a biotech health hub here in Wisconsin, which the Wisconsin Economic Development Commission just submitted with the Economic Development Administration with EDA, an application to get Wisconsin designated as a biotech health hub. And ironic, and this is where we're talking about really innovative partnerships. WEDC asked me as WRT Big Step to sign on to this, to be on the steering committee, one of the 15 partners in this application, because we know that we do not have the workforce skills here in Wisconsin right at this second to be a hub for biotech. And when we talk about particularly women, people of color, others having access to those careers, it's going to have to start with people. It's going to have to start with recruitment, outreach, training, right? So that we have diversity in that sector from the ground up. So production adjustments are thinking through mindfully about where we're going to produce what we need. How are we going to upskill that workforce? How are we going to find the workforce, upskill them? And then how do we provide career advancement through that? The second one is immigration. So, as we think about immigration policy, how does it affect our workforce? I know there are some calls by different groups to, think about how driver's licensing can occur, especially for CDL licensing. In Wisconsin, we have a shortage of about 6,000 CDL drivers in Wisconsin alone. And when we think about those who are immigrating to the US, to Wisconsin, is there a way to fast track driver's licensure that's safe? But what might that look like? The third is mitigating barriers to un- and underemployed. So the top three: transportation, housing, and childcare. Those have not gone away as barriers to entry into the workforce. And complicating that with COVID, we've seen massive shifts in how those sectors operate and how they're able to operate in the current economic environment. And so when we talk about mitigating barriers, how are we going to use massive federal investment, is the discussion we're having, to not solve workforce, but to address workforce issues that actually mitigate the ultimate barrier, right? The actual issue, which I'm going to say isn't necessarily always skills, right? It's lack of childcare, it's lack of transportation, and it's lack of housing. We contract with a company in northern Wisconsin that has some Department of Defense contracts, and they need to hire 600 folks in the next year and a half, and they only have about 300 housing units available. Wow. So as much as we're providing on-site apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship training, we're doing a lot of the recruitment, we're hitting some good marks, there's nowhere for folks to live in those areas that's close. So, we have to think about how innovatively are we going to mitigate some barriers. And then, of course, technological advancement. What we're seeing is a shift from pre-COVID, which was automation is going to take jobs, and they're going to take jobs of humans, and this is going to be a terrible thing. It's going to be catastrophic. And now the dialogue and the narrative has shifted to, we need to figure out AI and technological advancement and automation because we don't have enough of a labor force to do some of these jobs. And what does that look like? And how do we integrate human work and skilled labor with automation and AI, which is, again, on the horizon for all of us. So those are kind of the macro solutions. That's the dialogue happening at some of the technical college system board, at the Governor's Council on Workforce Investment, and of course in WRT Big Step as a workforce intermediary. So when we think about those macro solutions, what's actually happening in Wisconsin? because we can talk philosophically about all of those things, but in the end, my staff here, what are they working on to address some of these? And what we really see is this workforce is a complex collaborative network. And it's difficult to navigate sometimes on our end. So you can imagine for somebody who is perhaps or underemployed, trying to navigate a system that is complex, that includes many players, and that isn't always as collaborative as we'd like it to be. So one of the tools we have is our work with unions and apprenticeship. So what makes WRTP Big Step unique across the country is that for our manufacturing and construction trades, the associated unions and signatory employers pay into WRTP Big Step a couple cents on the dollar for every apprentice and journey worker worked in the state. That provides us a sustained revenue stream to provide workforce development for certified pre-apprenticeship. So we host about 4 certified pre-apprenticeship programs in-house and one full apprenticeship in-house here at WRTP Big Step. And so we see apprenticeship as a great tool toward family supporting wage jobs. It's equitable wages. Right now, the state just surpassed 15,000 apprentices in the state, which is a historic high. And we see this as a way that we can push this lever for expansion of apprenticeship to make our sectors more equitable in terms of pay, gender equity, and racial equity. The DWD has doubled down on this, and the state apprenticeship director has doubled down on this. We're seeing nursing apprenticeships, we're seeing childcare worker apprenticeship, farm manager apprenticeships. So particularly on the technical college side, making sure that agricultural apprenticeships are available for folks, so that there's a clear pathway to advancement and skills in these occupations. Technical college, of course, playing a role in the related instruction for apprenticeship, but also having their own apprenticeships. And something that WRTP Big Step and the technical college system has been working on is how do we expand apprenticeships in rural areas in Wisconsin? And the pathway from certified pre-apprenticeship to apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship to journey worker status is one of the ways that we can create these equitable pathways across the state, whether it's rural, urban, or suburban. K-12 schools, so we meet with guidance counselors nonstop about youth apprenticeship. We meet with guidance counselors about the different types of occupations available. We also partner with all the boys and girls clubs in Wisconsin. So research shows that kids start deselecting careers in the 5th grade if they don't see themselves represented in it. And so we're working with youth as young as 2nd grade, not with power tools yet, but really making sure we're exposing kids to different occupations, and with people employed in those occupations that maybe don't look like the traditional picture you might see of somebody in that occupation. And then we also offer summer trades academies across the state. So it's kind of like summer school, except it's much more work-based. And so there's some learning, there's some work, and at the end they earn a credential. Students can earn a credential for that, like a badge or a micro-credential saying they went through that. We're also working with correctional institutions. So there's about 6,000 folks released from Wisconsin correctional institutes each year. And what we're seeing is younger folks, so particularly from youth correctional facilities, who are being released and looking for gainful employment, particularly to pay child support, which again is another economic driver for families. And so we're doing training within correctional institutes and then providing that pathway out of those when they are returning citizens, and providing all of the supportive network, as you can imagine, around that. One of the best ways to reduce recidivism is to have a good paying job. And so we're attempting to use that. And again, all of this on the context, what we talked about before, is that we need workers, and employer policies have to, when we think about the landscape of employer policies, we have to think about, are we welcoming folks who have been justice impacted? Are we welcoming folks who maybe have a micro badge, a micro credential or badge for that? So we're not saying, well, you need X credential or X education, or you can't have this, you can have this. We need to be welcoming more folks into the workforce. So in terms of working with employers, not only meeting their EEO, their equal opportunity, employment opportunity goals, of which we function as that for a lot of employers in the state, but ensuring that their policies, and when they say DEI, right, which has been a hot topic, of course, in the university system and of course in Wisconsin generally, that DEI work is happening, that it's not just, oh, we have now a vice president of DEI and we're good. That's not how this works, right? We need to be more welcoming. We need to change our policies. We need to think more broadly about what demographically our workforce should look like going forward. Of course, working with community-based organization, there is no one organization, there is no one entity, there is no one administration that is going to solve all the workforce issues in Wisconsin. And so really working as that hub to a lot of spokes here. That's our role at WRTP, is to work as that hub. So we work with literacy services. We pair a lot of our credentials with high school equivalency degrees, both while folks are incarcerated, when they're out, if they're coming even out of a K-12 system, but they're out of school youth, they didn't actually achieve their high school diploma. Working with Latino workforce academies, with the urban leagues, United Ways, legal action. So again, if we do a lot of driver's license remediation, so that folks can have access to their driver's license. Or for a lot of youth, we're seeing never got their license because driver's ed is no longer offered in many schools, and the cost is a barrier to even taking driver's education classes. And then I mentioned Boys and Girls Club. So we're also working with all 11 workforce boards across the state of Wisconsin. Workforce boards receive the Department of Labor dollars, which then flow to our organization to do some of the training, to do the work. So we're like a preferred vendor with the workforce boards across the state. Working with some of our state departments, so of course, Department of Workforce Development on different initiatives, Wisconsin Economic Development Commission. So I mentioned the EDA Biotech Health Hub application there, showing that we are, workforce development is a huge economic driver, and access to it provides better economic indicators and outcomes. So working with WDC, the Department of Administration, the Department of Corrections. We're a vendor for WSDOT, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. So if you ever see those flaggers who are flagging you through on road construction, most likely they've been trained at WRTP Big Step to do that. Okay. And then the Public Service Commission as well. So we're a vendor with the Public Service Commission to figure out the workforce solutions for the $1.4 billion coming to Wisconsin in the beginning of 2024 for broadband expansion in the state. And my preliminary report to them has been, we need to spend about $75 million of that on workforce development alone, so that we have people to locate what's underground. So we have people to dig the trenches, to lay the fiber, right? A lot of the narrative has been about broadband equity. So getting everyone connected, digital equity, which is great, absolutely 100%, but we cannot have digital equity on tribal lands or in rural Wisconsin unless we dig the trenches and lay the fiber. That has to come first. And we want people, Wisconsinites, to have those jobs, right? We don't want a transient workforce from Texas coming up and doing that work. We want to build a career pathway. And that's one of the very specific ways we're working with with the technical colleges to figure out that career pathway. If you start in locating, so when you call Digger's Hotline, right, you get a locator. When you start there, and then you might progress to directional borer, so digging the trenches, then you might progress to broadband technician, and then you might progress into IT technology, right? What does that career pathway look like? And how can we ensure that people, once we have digital equity through the $1.4 billion, what might it look like then for folks to maintain that network, to work on that network, to expand the network, and then who knows in 10 years what our internet situation will look like. So being able to pivot into additional careers from there. The federal departments that we've been working with, the Department of Labor, NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Of course, I mentioned the Economic Development Administration. We just hosted the Department of Energy here. We are also looking to be contracted to provide all the training for EV charging stations across the state of Wisconsin, knowing that that will come. And again, what does that career pathway look like? So we're working with the electrical unions and with employers like Ingeteam, who does windmill generator maintenance, and now we'll be building EV charging stations. How do we have a career pathway into that, and then move up from there, and particularly through registered apprenticeship? So that's kind of like what we're doing on the ground, which is a lot of work. And so when we talk about like forecasting the future of workforce, right? What does that look like? And so this is a little bit of a scattered page for you, but I wanted to show you kind of what it looks like. We can talk about policy. I can talk about, what we're doing with the technical college system, with the Governor's Council on Workforce, investment in workforce. But really what it boils down to is people. It boils down to the people who work in workforce, who are dedicated to this, but also the face of what our workforce will look like. When we talk about automation or AI, it will play a role. It will play a role, but we need programmers. We need folks to, build. We need folks to run some of the master boards that will control CNC machines and things like that. So 4 ways we can think about what the future might hold in this space, and particularly in Wisconsin. Inclusive leadership. Inclusive leadership. I can't say this enough. And I actually gave a keynote last night to some business owners here in Milwaukee that if we're not thinking about how to engage all parts of our workforce, whether folks are justice impacted, whether they're coming from the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, when we're talking about folks veterans coming into the workforce, when we're talking about women who are coming into the workforce, what does that look like in terms of being inclusive for workplace policies, universal design? It includes, focusing on dismantling structural racism and sexism in the workplace. I mean, it's the hard work of being an inclusive leader. Second, occupational desegregation. So that's something we talk a lot about. There are occupations, so home healthcare workers are overrepresented with women, and particularly women of color, and happen to be some of the lowest paying occupations in Wisconsin. Whereas construction is overwhelmingly white and male and has some of the highest wages in those occupations. And so we have an occupational segregation problem with our occupations across the nation. But, here in Wisconsin, I'm optimistic that we will find some solutions. And my organization is trying to contribute to that in ways of like I said, almost about 70% of those we train are people of color, women, and we're seeing higher than the national and state averages in our cohorts, which gives me hope that we're moving in the right direction. Structural barrier remediation. So this is that, can we take some of the federal investments and think about childcare pilots? We need childcare that works, and at the policy level, we've been talking about this. There was recently a hearing, if any of you attended, about, well, instead of addressing the need for childcare and affordable childcare, let's just increase ratios in classrooms, or let's allow 16-year-olds now to work. And that was a tough hearing to sit through, because we're putting Band-Aid over Band-Aid over Band-Aid on a structural issue here. Same with housing and transportation. How might we use federal investment to directly change the systems that are preventing people from entering the workforce or participating in the workforce? And because it's structural barrier, it's the structural barriers that I think are what's underlying that narrative of, well, people don't want to work. People want to work. It's getting to work. It's being able to find the affordable childcare to work. It's being able to find the affordable apartment so that you can live close to where you work. So you're not commuting, or you can't commute because you don't have a vehicle, right? Like it's a vicious cycle. And then finally, I think the generational investments. I mentioned broadband alone will dedicate $1.4 billion of resources to Wisconsin. Department of Energy is creating a workforce accelerator program, and we're in their pilot project right now for that. So that we'll see several $1 million. Water, so like clean water initiatives, about $270 million was just dedicated to clean up around Lake Michigan in the Wisconsin region. So, how is that going to look? And then there's other, even the Federal Highways Commission has money for bridges. In the news, the Blatnick Bridge has been there, about, the bridge between Superior and Duluth. That will only continue in terms of federal investment and workforce across the state. So, and I am hopeful that the perfect storm that we talked about is actually the spark for what we need to see going forward. The one thing we do know is that the workforce today in Wisconsin will not look like the workforce of Wisconsin tomorrow, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 25 years. But if we can start in collaboration with our technical college system, with our workforce board system, and with some of our state entities, and then a workforce intermediary like WRTP Big Step, that we can create equitable access to equitable career pathways for Wisconsinites that will ensure that they have access to family supporting wages for generations to come. So that's kind of the big brief overview. I know it was about 35 minutes. So I'm trying to leave room for questions, but I've included this last slide. I know it's being recorded as well, and it'll be shared. So I did include the links to my LinkedIn. That's where you can follow me and all my adventures and workforce development. If you have not visited Wisconomy, the Job Center of Wisconsin, you can type in wisconomy.com. I love their pivot tables and their graphs. They have data broken down by county and by zip code, so you can create any of your own graphs and charts and tables about labor participation, workforce rates in your own area. There's so much information there. And then, of course, our impact report at WRTP Big Step, the link is there as well. If you want to see kind of where we're doing, where we're headed, what we're working on. And then my personal email there to Blumer@wrtp.org. If you have additional questions, or this was kind of the big, broad overview of what we're working on, but I'm always happy to dive deeper into any one topic because there's so much there. But I'm sure you don't have the next 8 hours to talk about all of the nuances of workforce development in Wisconsin.
I can't believe how much you guys are doing, and all these, as you say, complex pieces to do this. It's stunning. It's really stunning. Does every state have this type of organization?
Good question. No. So I can say with confidence, we're pretty special here in Wisconsin, and the foresight that our founders had here in Wisconsin with WRTP Big Step is phenomenal. That we would need an intermediary in workforce, particularly for both training and the collaboration piece. The closest we've come, so we actually spawned Hire 360, which is the Chicago-based one that's kind of like us. So we help them get set up, and then they're running, but that's Chicagoland area. The machinists and aerospace workers have a little bit similar in Seattle, but that's all funded by Boeing. They wanted to kind of create their own talent pipeline there. And then there's a few starts and stops by some regions in California, but we're it. So I always say Wisconsin has a tremendous asset, lots of assets, but an asset in workforce development.
So whose brainstorm was it? WRTP? What administration? Where did it start?
So it was actually privately started as a workforce group about 45 years ago by apprentices. By apprentices in the Milwaukee area, but then has since expanded statewide, who saw the need for a dedicated kind of diverse talent pipeline. In the early 90s, there was a push to incorporate manufacturing into that work. And that was from the direct loss of big manufacturing in the Milwaukee and Madison areas.
Yeah, right.
And so that was kind of I would say a county / statewide initiative. So that we joined forces in 1993. And then in 2011 started focusing on other sectors as well. So it's always been a private nonprofit organization, but has close ties to municipalities, counties, and state.
But you're not just Milwaukee focused.
Nope. You will find WRTV Big Step staff in Madison, Racine, and we have field representatives in northern Wisconsin, so Wausau, Stevens Point, Superior, and La Crosse.
Yeah. Oh gosh, the rural stuff is, we've had several speakers over the last couple of years, and the rural, well, with Governor Evers' rural commission, we had the director of that talk, and that certainly strikes certainly a sad note around the state of what's happened with it. And I think that ties in also with the politics of it. People see they have something that happens and results, and they're noticed. The whole politics of resentment with Kathy Kramer Walsh. And so being left out, particularly now on the broadband, you must see some terrible stuff. And it's not just north of Highway 29.
It has been difficult. It's been very difficult, particularly for rural Wisconsin and also our Indigenous friends as well. And what we're seeing is some of the money is coming through, and this is not to impugn any one department or anything like that. With some of the monies that have already flowed through, they're going to local municipalities, but local municipalities do not have the ability to vet RFPs, to get vendors, to write it. There isn't the workforce per se to do it that's trained. And so if the hard part about some of the federal investment is if it's not spent in a certain amount of time or encumbered at a certain point, it has to be returned. And so how do we build capacity of local rural infrastructure to be able to spend the money to get the work done?
Yeah. You must be a lightning rod on some of these issues for folks who don't want to see more immigration or concerned about the borders, who say that everything that's happened, particularly during COVID and afterwards, discouraged people from really working. I mean, you guys are in a lightning rod for all of this. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, handling it, I think we have a very strong direction here, and we have really strong core values. And we know that the more folks we welcome into the Wisconsin economy, the better we all do. And I was talking with a very seasoned union plumber the other day, and I was saying, we're working on broadband. We aren't always doing just building trades, right? We're working on broadband and we're working in clean energy. And he goes, the better roads we have to all places in Wisconsin, and the more internet we have in Wisconsin, goes, the more I can go in and build pipes and toilets, because it benefits me in the long run. I was like, yes, that's it. So I think there's some, I think when we talk about the economics of it, so there was recently a Harvard business study that for every 1% increase in gender equity in any given company, you see a 3% increase in overall revenue for that company. So if you had gender equity, you're talking about 15% increase in revenue. For racial equity, it's 33%. If you have racial equity within your company, it's a 33% increase in revenue as to those who don't. And so sometimes when folks are saying, well, it's good the way it is, it worked before COVID, we're going to stay how it is. First of all, demographically, you can't. It's not going to happen. But second of all, if the Harvard Business School is telling you that you can increase revenue by 33% if you had a diverse and equitable workforce, I don't know then you don't want to be in business, I guess. I don't like kind of letting the statistics speak for themselves. So that's one of the ways we talk about it. I think also when we talk about, the people don't want to work, don't want to do things, we put it more on the structure rather than the worker. There's a lot of folks who want to work. In fact, I have a list of hundreds of folks who are still, looking for positions, and people are like, well, you have a list of people looking. I'm like, yeah, but we're going to have to figure out how we find driver's licenses and transportation. I go, that's what you should be mad at. If you're going to direct your energy anywhere, it should be at, why have we not figured out how to provide transportation or affordable childcare or housing in your area?
Let's go to some of the chats. I could talk to you all day. And would raising minimum wage make a difference?
Good question. Again, I'm not an economist. I think any raise in wages would probably help. I think that's why we don't particularly focus on any one wage that's good or bad. That's why we talk about apprenticeship as a really good tool, because there are equitable wages that come with benefits. And so while raising the minimum wage, I think can't hurt. It might be a good step in the right direction. What we really want to have a larger conversation about is, what are wages that support somebody's rent payment and their childcare payment? And does it come with benefits for the long term? Since we have in this country, our benefits are tied to our jobs. And, if you can't take your kids to the dentist, and if you can't if you can't go to a therapist, or, if you have, if you need some trauma remediation, then is it a quality job or not? And so, short answer, yes, I think it would help. Long answer is that's the first step. There are so many more after that.
I figured that, when everybody says, oh, just go get those 2-year degree and get those jobs. Well, those jobs, if they're union jobs, that's one thing. It's just otherwise, yeah, interesting. 25 years ago, it was a very difficult, usually losing battle for women to get construction apprenticeship in Madison. Has that changed?
It's changing right now. So it took 25 years to at least see the needle moving. So women make up about 2 to 3% of the construction industry nationally. We're starting to see in Wisconsin that number approaching hopefully more like 5 or 6%, and we're graduating 10%, a little over 10% of women in our cohorts. So we're starting to see some movement here in Wisconsin, particularly in the Madison area, with the recognition by some of the employers. So we've gotten our construction employers on board. So when you see some of the construction around, particularly the university or downtown, you'll see Findorf, you'll see Bolt, you'll see some of those. They've made some good commitments to hiring women, and right now working with the unions as well, there to diversify their benches for more women. So I would say we're seeing movement. Has it reached parity? Nowhere near yet.
You've got a couple of folks out here just saying, we're so fortunate to have you in your position. And one says, my son is a second-year electrical apprentice who got started through Big Step.
Oh, fantastic.
The Lord helped him. So there.
That's great. Yeah, it looks like there's one in there too. Any chance the need for workers could change the tone in Wisconsin to change laws about marijuana driver's licensing for immigrants? Oh my gosh. This is huge. This is coming to a head probably in the next year or two. As you know, all the states around us have now some form of legalization. Wisconsin is the holdout here. This has been an ongoing discussion among the Associated General Contractors in Wisconsin. It's been across the League of Municipalities, things like that. National Governors Association is having conversations about this. In Wisconsin, particularly, it will change. If it becomes legalized, that changes a lot of how we look at policy, and what does zero tolerance mean versus what does zero tolerance really mean. I've been in rooms recently, like last week, where they're talking about how many picomilligrams is acceptable and in urine, right, for a drug test. And I think that will change, and I think it will affect our workforce. I think with the destigmatization of it, and particularly where we see it, the real harm right now of the stigmatizing it is that folks who have been incarcerated for drug-related, particularly marijuana-related charges, that are unable to achieve employment because of that, we see that changing if there is some level of legalization in Wisconsin. And for driver's license permits, yes, that has been a huge topic of, can we think about what are the steps to achieve driver's license? Is there a way to have some type of credit for prior learning? The Latino Workforce Academy in Madison has been phenomenal and on the forefront of driver's licensing for immigrants. And we work with them. They're our transportation provider, a training provider for a lot of our classes in Madison. And I know Baltazar de Santa Ana, if you know him, he's been a fierce advocate for how might we rethink our driver's licensing system for those who are new to Wisconsin.
Have manufacturers dropped their drug test? I mean, it used to be a big bigger deal, it seems, than now. I know when I was at the State Journal, we did a story, and it was about welders up in Manitowoc or something, and they couldn't find him. Well, they could find him, but they couldn't find him who could pass the drug test. And again, what is the drug? Is it marijuana? Is it hard stuff? I mean, that have people just simply sort of stopped it? Have manufacturers dropped it?
So the Wisconsin Manufacturers Association has not dropped it. So they will, they provide guidance on it. I think we're seeing more smaller manufacturers. So those with less than 100 employees start to say, as long as, again, this is where that, like, what's the amount that's okay. So they may still drug test. They may do random drug tests. They're not consistently doing it. Construction actually has been much more. We're going to continue to do it particularly because of heights and heavy machinery. Operating engineers are still, if you're gonna operate a bulldozer, you have to be sober. So manufacturing is a little more hit or miss, especially with smaller manufacturers. Construction's sticking the line of zero tolerance for now.
When a somewhat related question, I think it was last week there was some progress made on getting CCAP to drop people who have been evicted from their records, allowing for people to indeed get housing. Must be the same kind of an issue with employment, right? That people get on that. Well, CCAP, for people who are not familiar with it, is our record of people who have been in trouble with the law, and for a variety of reasons, including marijuana and misdemeanors as well as felonies. Is that an issue that has been addressed?
Yes, so it has definitely come up about, how can people be de-identified in particularly in applying for jobs and careers, right, and apprenticeships, things like that. So we've actually started a pilot program with The Way Out. I can try and I can drop it in the chat, but they are a de-identified fair chance hiring platform. And working with Ellie Rivera, who is the founder, he has some money, some angel investment from different organizations to do this. We're running the beta test right now with some employers, and what we're finding is when you take out the name and of course any of the justice impacted content, things like that, people are getting hired and they're doing well. We're seeing better outcomes. So I think the rise of those de-identified fair chance hiring platforms is going to be key. This is particularly in construction, manufacturing, hospitality he's working in right now. And hopefully that will translate into more fair chance hiring. The unions are now, I can say the unions are now moving to a similar thing. So before, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, even 5 years ago, right, you'd have your formal letter, and you'd have to go in front of the committee, and they judge whether or not you could be a member. Now, a lot of them move to online de-identified membership application.
Good.
One of the partners I didn't see up there on your list were our sports. When you look at, and I've been working with a guy who retired now from the state, who sees sports as a major driver for youth, not just the people who bounce the ball, everything behind it, from managing the scoreboard to getting the data, everything behind sports. For 5 people playing basketball, 10 people in it, there must be 100 people for every person to get that done. And you look what the Bucks with the district, the Deer District, the proposal to expand again more for the Brewers. Of course, Packers that just went through all that. There must be a lot of attention or ideas for kids who want to be involved in that kind of entertainment. So are those Brewer, Bucks, and Packers, are they stepping up to be part of what you're doing?
It's a good question. I think in in providing some attention to the trades or to apprenticeship somewhat. In Madison or Fitchburg area, if you know the tradesmen hockey team, that's supported by the trades. And so that's part of it, that we're trying to use that as a recruitment tool. I think where it actually, well, I should say the Bucks, the Fiserv Forum itself is hosting a career fair November 2nd for 1,200 youth for us. So I think there's some of that participation from the players themselves or the entities themselves, not necessarily, but where we are seeing some interesting interactions there is so the Deer District and the Wisconsin Center District in the Milwaukee area has been phenomenal about implementing project labor agreements and community benefit plans when they do expand or do any construction. And so that usually comes with 40% residents on the job, 10% women, 2% veteran-owned or disability-owned subcontractors, and then some youth apprenticeship requirements as well. Same with AmFam Field, looking to expand for the Brewers Stadium and create that same kind of district there. We're seeing some interest in some project labor agreements and some community benefits agreements there. In Green Bay, that was a little more difficult, the Lambeau area there, but there were some community benefits agreements that did happen there. So you know, and I should say Fiserv Forum, the hospitality, when you go there for a Bucks game or anything, that is a unionized workforce, and the Associated Trades Hotel now. So that district has made a commitment that when there are youth career fairs and things like that, they'll talk about how they're using local workforce and you can work there too and things like that. I don't know if we have as much engagement from the teams themselves.
I know we're going to have to let you go here in a minute, but could you just talk for a minute about the two-year schools? I mean, how's enrollment? Who is it? Who's showing up? Women, men? Boy, I mean, it seems like men are just dropping out. What's happening with 2 years? In the short time you've been there, I'm sure you had a lot of data, but what generally overall is your take on the health of our two-year system and where it's going?
So I will give kudos to Morna Foy, who is the system president. I think she's a true visionary of how we can ensure that our technical college system is relevant and thriving. So enrollment actually is decent. So I would say fairly steady. Enrollment of immigrants to Wisconsin is up. I think it's 12%, maybe more. So we're seeing more of those English as a second language learners. We're seeing more immigrants, even across all 16 colleges. And then we're also seeing more interest in, I would say that almost like the shorter courses, so maybe taking courses here and there. So I think the way that the technical college system is adjusting classes, or each college itself is adjusting their class scheduling, has changed recently. So whether they're hybrid environments, whether there's access for nights and weekends, so the adult learner, and then those who are new to Wisconsin, new citizens to Wisconsin, we're seeing higher enrollments. Morna Foy talks very eloquently about more women are entering the technical college, the two-year college system than men, and I don't know if there's any one reason why. There's probably a lot of reasons, but she's talking about how do we engage young men into what, and this starts in 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And really the push there is to do dual enrollment with high school and technical college. So and that's where they're seeing more gender parity is when juniors in high school start on that dual enrollment path with their local technical college. So we're seeing more high school students graduate high school with an almost completed associate's degree. So that's as much as I can tell you now.
That's tremendous. Well, thank you so very much. I I'm so amazed you could find an hour to spend with us when you're going on the Federal Reserve Board, for God's sakes, and everything else you're doing. You rattling that off, I thought, I don't know how you agreed to do this hour, but I really want to say thanks.
Yeah,
Dennis,
thank you very much, Lindsay.
Dennis, it's all you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fantastic. I really appreciate it. And again, any feedback or questions, feel free to contact me. I'd love to continue the dialogue.
Yeah.
Good.
Well,
Great.
thank you so much. And Dennis, I guess that's where we are for the day, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And we will be in touch with details for next week.
Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Lindsay.
Just wanted to say, in addition to thanks, that Lindsay's really given me hope today, because it's really been a positive message. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Very
sharing
well.
that.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.